met your relative.
Hello, my name is Trelawney Goodell. I've been a resident of Lexington since 1975. My grandfather, Charles Wheeler, was a general in the First World War, serving under General Pershing. I knew my grandfather because he lived in our house with us for the last 3 years of his life. He was a very gentle and lovely person. My grandfather was born in 1865 and he died in 1946. He was born in Illinois, and he graduated from the West Point in the year of 1887, fourth in his class. Just before the war, my grandfather was the commanding officer at the Watertown Arsenal in Watertown. My grandfather was well known for introducing the Taylor system of scientific management to the arsenal. That had a big impact on what happened in the World War I arsenal contribution that he made. In 1917, he went to Washington as the acting director of ordnance for the Army. In 1918, he was assigned to go to France on the staff of General Pershing as chief ordnance officer for the AEF. My grandfather had two children, my mother, who at the time of the war was around 10, and a brother 10 years older than her, who was at West Point. My grandfather, when he went to France, decided to write a page a day to his children to have some record, a personal record, not a government record, of the time that he spent there. In reading his diary at one point, I came across a day that I thought would be of interest. The day was Wednesday, June 5th, 1918. In Paris, he said the weather was nice. He was talking about going to lunch at a house about 25 minutes south of Paris, and he said that there were 15 people at this luncheon, including Mr. Winston Churchill, British Minister of Munitions. Mr. Churchill, in speaking earnestly to me, said that he considered himself one-half American, that his grandfather was editor of the Plain Leader in Syracuse, or was it Rochester, and urged that the Americans come over in great numbers and be assigned in small unity to the British and the French, where they could be trained while doing real service. I need not say I found him most interesting. He had come over to France from his home in Surrey in a little over an hour in an airplane and said he had had a delightful trip. After the armistice, my grandfather served in several positions in England and in France before he returned to the United States in 1919. When he returned to the States, one of his staff members, Colonel Eaton, asked my grandfather to join the Eaton Crane Pike paper manufacturing company in Pittsfield. My grandfather served as vice president of manufacturing of that company until 1933. In 1943, my grandfather came to live with my family in Wayland. He spent his last 3 years with us. He died there in 1946 at the age of 80. My grandfather was awarded 3 medals. One was the Distinguished Service Medal for the United States. The other was the Legion of Honor from France, and the Order of the Bath from England. I have a letter from one of his staff members from France who was celebrating the fact that my grandfather got the Distinguished Service Medal. This is a letter from Colonel Hathaway to my grandfather. It gives a good feeling of how fond that my grandfather's staff was of him. This is a letter after the war in 1922. I just learned of your having been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal and want to extend my heartiest congratulations. This will no doubt be a greater source of gratification to those of us who had the pleasure and good fortune to serve with you and under you during the war than it may be to you. I believe I express the sentiment of many in saying that the only regret we felt at the termination of the war was that it brought an end to the close association with a leader who inspired us with confidence, respect, and admiration, and whose example encouraged and brought out the best there was in us. With all the best wishes, I remained, Colonel Hathaway. During the years of 1908 to 1917, my grandfather, when he was the commander of the Watertown Arsenal, they lived at the commander's mansion, and my mother spent her first 8 years living at the commander's mansion. My grandmother died in 1916 in Watertown, and when my grandfather was sent to Washington, D.C. in 1918, he put my mother in a boarding school in Washington, D.C. Her brother at the time was a student at West Point.